Uh, Morning, everyone. For those attending for the first time, my name is Renus Musha. I'll be a tutor for risk management. Um, so for those attending for the first time, you'll see that we are going to be starting off from study unit 1.6 because we already had a class last weekend on Saturday. And if please make sure that you check in your different WhatsApp groups that you're going to be put into as well, so that you're able to check the timetable that we have, because we already have a timetable for us for the period that we're going to be going through the study units as well, which is going to be between now until end of October. The timetable is there, which shows you which date we're going to be having the classes and the duration of the class as well. All that information is available, so you should be able to access that information. So last week, we did start unit 1, and as we did start unit 1, we did unit 1 all the way up to unit 1.1 all the way to unit 1.5. Now, when you look at unit 1, we're looking at lessons not learned, where we're basically looking to say, so when would we say there are different case studies where risk management failed? So I'm looking at the different case studies where risk management failed. And then, so you see that from study unit 1.1 all the way to study unit 1.4, they're basically giving you the different case studies for you to go through where risk management failed. So study unit 1.1, you're looking at the case of ESCOM, and study unit 1.2, I think you're looking at Bearings Bank, then you look at HIH, and then you look at HIH, and you also, and then for unit 1.4, you look at COME as well, right? So please go over the different case studies and familiarize yourself with the different case studies as well. If you look at the class that we did last week, please note that we don't really dwell too much time on these case studies. Please don't spend too much of your time on this case study. Just make sure that you understand the overall case, but not necessarily going into too much detail when it comes to the case as well, because when you look at the questions that they ask you in the exam, they will give you a case study, and then based on the case study, you now answer the case based on the questions and now applying the things that you would have learned for risk management as well. So because of that, it's not necessarily that they're going to be asking you to say, from what you've done or read from case study of ESCOM, what can you do, or how can you assess the way there was risk management failure and all that. So it means that they have to give you the case study, and based on the information that they give you, then apply. So you see that studying around 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, we didn't really spend too much time on it. Familiarize yourself with the case study, but don't spend too much time, because you'll see that even when you look at the case of ESCOM as well, it's quite a lot of pages that you have to go through when it comes to the case study. I think it's about 3 readings that you have to do. And on those 3 readings, it's more than 100 pages that is given there. For practical purposes, where you're now applying your knowledge now in the real world, yes, you need to know that. But remember, for us, we're going to be concentrating more on ensuring that what you pass the exam. So because of that, go through the case study of ESCOM, but don't spend too much of your time going through that case study as well. Now, from what you've looked at now, from the unit 1.1 all the way through to unit 1.4, you see that sorry. You see that so from what you have done from all these case studies as well, we're now going on to look and say, so based on what you've seen from these case studies, on unit 1.5, we look at now risk management. What are they and when do they happen? So that you're able to now say, so how would you identify a situation where you would have said what? You're going to say, here in this particular case, from this information that we have, there was a risk management failure. So which means that that's what you're now going to be looking. So now from unit 1.5, we're now going more into detail. So you'll see that unit 1.5, we did cover it in the previous class as well. I'll make the video available so that you're able to access that video as well for Unit 1.5. So please take note that any class that you miss, you will be able to catch up on that class as well using the videos. So today we're going to be looking at Unit 1.6, and Unit 1.6 looks at the acronym VUCA. So if you check in your articles, or in your study guide, so if you check in your study guide, where we look at Unit 1.6, they say what a difference a word makes. Understanding threats to performance in a VUCA world. So that's basically what we're going to be looking at when you look at what Unit 1.6 and under self-assessment. So please take note that when we go through these different study units as well, we go through them based on self-assessment outcomes, because usually the self-assessment outcomes now is the one that is going to be guiding you to say, from this particular article, this is the information that you need to fish out from that particular article so that you apply it for Rsk4803 as well. So when you look at Unit 1.6, they say, explain the acronym VUCA and illustrate with examples from your own enterprise. Then they also say, discuss the complexity in the context of the article and draw a comparison with the 7 billion write-down of Woolworths with their subsidiary in industry, of which this part, I don't really think that it's going to be that necessary. Reason being, if they are going to be giving you a question based on the VUCA acronym, which I'm going to give you as a homework as well. So which means that by the end of this particular class as well, I'll give you a homework on VUCA. Reason being, historically, ever since they introduced the articles, the lecturer has never asked a question in the exam based on VUCA. But now, if you look at what was the way it was covered in the, if you look at the way it was covered in the previous year, which is 2023, the lecturer brought a case study on VUCA in the assignments, but he didn't really bring any questions when it comes to the final exam as well. So which means we can see that normally when the lecturer has to bring in a new topic that's going to be asked in the exam, they creep it in by bringing it in the assignments, and then from the assignments, that's when they can now ask you that particular question as well in the exam. So what I'm going to do when it comes to the acronym of VUCA, because it can be confusing for so many people as well, we're going to go through the section on VUCA. Then as a homework, I'm going to copy the questions that the lecturer asked in the way the lecturer gave a case study in the previous year. So I'm going to give you that case study, and then I'm also going to give you the questions on VUCA based on that particular case study as well. Then in the next class, before we proceed on to the next study unit, we review that particular homework as well, because it's one of those concepts that I feel we need to make sure that we're able to cover that and understand it as well, because since this concept has been brought in for the first time as assignment questions, most likely we should expect that at some point in the future, the lecturer should be asking this question as in the exam as well. So when it comes to the acronym VUCA, the acronym VUCA basically represents. So when it comes to the acronym VUCA, VUCA basically stands for a situation with volatility, with the characteristics of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, as well as ambiguity. So you see that when it comes to the acronym VUCA, when you look at it as well, it might be some of these situations might be very much closely related to each other. So you need to be able to distinguish to say, so how I'm going to say this situation is uniquely volatile? How are we going to say this situation is uniquely uncertain? or complex or ambiguous as well. So these are the things that you need to be able to identify in a particular case study so that you're able to address that particular case study as well. So historically, we see that this acronym is basically a military term that was used by military generals to say, how do we make decisions? Because remember, you are, as a risk manager in a particular entity as well, you are basically going to be making risk management decisions as you go. And remember, as you can see, compared to the previous situation where you are running an organization historically, you will see that probably, let's say 50 years ago, you wouldn't have to worry about the internet. You don't have to, so which basically means that if you are having your customers in a particular area, you wouldn't worry about your customer having too many options because your competitors were mostly those people in your particular area. But what do we see? Now we're living in a global community where customers can now be able to order things on Takealot. They can now be able to order things on Amazon, for example. So which basically means that over and above the things that they are going to be sold by a retailer, if they go to the mall, or if they go to a particular shopping center as well, they also have an option for them to be able to get things around from so many other sources as well around the world. And because of that, it basically means that there's a lot of information that you are now able to deal with as an organization. So because of what? Globalization. So because of the issue of globalization, there's a lot of information that you are going to be dealing with as well. So because of that information, it basically means that you need to be able to make decisions quickly, and mainly because things are changing drastically. Just like what, so which means that this VUCA acronym basically emanated from history where military generals, they were making decisions as the war is raging on. So which basically means that as the war is raging on, they were having to make decisions as well. And the situations that they were facing as they were making decisions is basically situations that were volatile, where there was a lot of uncertainty, and it was complex, mainly because it's complex now, mainly because there's basically a lot of information that you have to be processing and so many moving parts as well. And also, there's also a lot of what ambiguity that you're having to deal with as well. So which means that from that military term, we're not going to be using the acronym VUCA in a normal business environment as well, mainly because the situation that we faced from the battleground, from where military generals face from the battleground, is more or less the same that situation that you're also finding in what? In the normal business environment as well. I see someone was asking for, requesting for the email address. My email address is u27286@tuas.co.za. So if there's any queries that you have, you can send through your query via email, or you can send through the query via email, or I'll also give you your contacts as well. As soon as you belong to your different WhatsApp groups, then I'll give you my contacts as well so that you're able to communicate with me as well. So going back to our article, we see that when it comes to the acronym VUCA, so looking at more detail with regards to the acronym VUCA, you will see that in the article, so the article that we're going to be looking at, is the article which says what a difference a word makes, understanding threats to performance in a VUCA world. So please take note that as soon as you're registered with us, you will be able to access these articles. You're going to be able to access these articles. And remember, these articles are already highlighted with a bit of notes on them as well. So please take note that as soon as you are registered and you belong to the different WhatsApp groups as well, you will be able to access these articles as soon as possible. And we'll also share a video which shows you exactly how you're going to be able to access these articles as well. So please make sure that as soon as you are registered, you communicate with your admin, you will be able to access this information as well. So in this article, we look at what difference a word makes, understanding threats to performance in a VUCA world. So looking at this, on section 1, we look at living in a VUCA world. And I'm just going to be going to this article based on the information that has been highlighted as well. So that's basically how we streamline the information. And the highlighted information is based on the learning outcomes. So they say, of course, optimists see the edge a company can gain if its leaders master their accompanying challenges. For example, volatility provides profit opportunity. Uncertainty is opportunity. Simplifying IT complexity is a major opportunity. And ambiguity equals opportunity. So now, when you look at Rsk4803, we're basically saying whenever you're answering a question or whenever you're going through a particular article for Rsk4803, the question that you should always ask yourself is, what is the goal of the firm? The goal of the firm is to maximize shareholders' wealth. So the goal of the firm is to maximize shareholders' wealth. So if the goal of the firm is to maximize shareholders' wealth, what does that mean? It basically means that to be able to maximize shareholders' wealth, we need to be able to maximize the share price. And also, for us to be able to maximize the share price, it basically means that you must be able to minimize your costs, maximize your benefits, and then from a risk management perspective, you must be able to minimize your risk exposure as well. So you need to be able to maximize your costs, to maximize your benefits, minimize your costs, and also minimize your risk. So when you now look at the relationship between risk and return, that's where you see that from an investment perspective, or from a financial management perspective as well, we also saw that the goal is to be able to maximize your benefits, is to maximize your return for a given level of risk, and to be able to minimize your risk for a given level of return. So based on this, we see that now when you look at risk management, we're basically saying that whenever you see a situation where there is risk, it basically means that there is also an opportunity for you to be able to what? To maximize. There's an opportunity to be explored so that you create a competitive advantage for your organization. So whenever you see that there's a situation of risk, it means that there is a benefit that you can accrue from there, where from that particular opportunity, you're going to be able to create a competitive advantage for your organization. And as you create the competitive advantage, it means that you're also going to be able to what? Maximize the shareholders' wealth as well. So which means all these situations that we see under the VUCA acronym, the idea is, yes, from a risk management, historically, risk management was seen as a defensive strategy, where you're basically saying that, how do we avoid this? How do we make sure that we're able to avoid this particular situation? Or how do we deal with this particular situation? But now, in modern risk management perspective, we're basically saying, over and above from seeing a situation of and also minimizing the impact of risk exposure, we should also exploit those opportunities that arise from a risk situation, so that if we exploit those opportunities, we're able to maximize shareholders' wealth. Are there any questions so far? Any questions? On the next paragraph, they say, 3 significant problems exist in how leaders have employed these terms. First, their use has become cavalier, where VUCA has become a cute, trendy way of saying unpredictable change. Though the words do have related meanings, it's the differences among them that are most valuable for leaders to understand. And secondly, they say, second, even when pundits and leaders are sensitive to the differences in meaning, there is a lack of information regarding just what it is that leaders should do in order to confront one or another of these conditions. And finally, and likely because there is a depth of actionable advice out there, too many leaders are confronting this VUCA world by simply throwing up their hands. Moving on to the next paragraph, they also go on to say, consider these three problems, and it is evident that the second and the third are not unavoidable consequences of the modern business world, but rather entirely avoidable outcomes of the first. Then the article also goes on to say, in the paragraphs that follow, we begin by pointing out the differences between the terms volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And there's a table that we're also going to be looking at as well, which basically gives you that scenario of volatility, describe you what it is, and also how you can also be able to deal with a situation that is what? Volatile, for example. And the same goes on to uncertainty, complexity, and also ambiguity as well. Then on this paragraph, they also say, then we discuss how to identify VUCA situations in the organizational environment and distinguish exactly which type of unpredictability is being experienced. And finally, we discuss the ways leaders need to position their companies to address these singularly. So each requires something different from the company and its leadership. On section 2, we look at what do these terms mean and why and what do they mean for your company. And the first acronym that we're going to be looking at there is a situation with that is deemed to be having volatility. So we'll come back to this particular table after we go through these different situations. So here they say, a volatile situation can be defined as one that is unstable or unpredictable. It does not necessarily involve complex structure, a critical lack of knowledge, or doubt about the outcomes, what outcomes may result from key events. So that's when we say we have a situation that is what deemed to be volatile. So which means when a situation is deemed to be volatile, we're basically saying you know something is coming, but don't know how quickly and the magnitude in which it will happen. So you know that something is going to happen. Now, the timing of exactly how quickly it's going to happen, you really don't. That's why you don't know. And exactly how big the situation is. Is it going to cause catastrophic losses? Or is it just going to cause heavy and minimum impact? Or is it just going to have a moderate impact on your organization? That's where those are the outcomes that you don't know exactly how it's going to end up, what impacting your organization. So that's when we have a situation that is deemed to be volatile. So here they say, the secret to dealing with volatility is with any component of VUCA, is understanding the opportunities and threats inherent in the situation. So that's basically how you deal with a situation that is deemed to be volatile. They also go on to say, when volatile change is expected, the best way to prepare is to devote resources towards developing agility. So which means when you're facing a situation that is volatile, we're basically saying that you must ensure that your organization is agile enough to be able to deal with that particular situation as well. So which means in this case, the key to agility is having a reliable forecasting. So you need to be having reliable forecasting where you're basically saying, because this situation is volatile, we now need to do scenario analysis to say, if this plays out this way, how are we going to be able to deal with it? And if the impact ends up playing out this way, how are we going to be able to deal with it as well? For example, you're not going to be saying, if it's just going to be a minimum impact on the organization as well, what do we have in place to be able to deal with it or to actually mitigate the impact of this particular situation? And if the impact is going to be resulting in catastrophic losses for the organization as well, how are we going to be able to ensure that we deal with this situation? And remember, the key to agility is basically, we are basically saying that you must be able to have a situation where you, after you have mitigated the impact of this situation, the organization must be able to come out of this situation and not only come out of this situation, create a competitive advantage so that you're also going to be able to what? Maximize shareholders' wealth at the end of the day. So are there any questions when it comes to a situation that is deemed to be volatile? Any questions?
Through you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Is it possible that we get the, not specifically the video, but the article, what you are reading?
Yes, that's what I was saying, that we will share. I remember, normally what we do is that once you're registered, we already have a database where all these articles are available immediately from all the way from study unit 1 to study unit 23. The articles are already there. They are highlighted with a bit of notes on them as well. So it's always easier for you to be able to just download them by yourself, because it's quite a lot of articles that we need to be able to download as well. So immediately after this particular class, we are going to please just chat on your different WhatsApp groups so that we're able to give you access to those articles as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there any questions?
I have a question, Reynolds.
Yes.
So if we look at reliable forecasting, there's definitely scenarios that don't allow one to do this well. For example, a natural disaster, or like we have had a situation where a cyclone had caused damage on our facility on an island, and that facility is going to be offline for many months, not projected at all. So COVID would be another example. So I'm just checking, there are scenarios where it is not going to be possible, and you would then have to deal with that level of uncertainty and make sure that you come out of it as the best way possible. Is that correct in my understanding? Thank you.
All right. So when it comes to that, remember, study unit 1, we're being introduced to risk management. In the other chapters, we're going to now go and delve deeper into this. Reason being, with every organization, when you are faced with a situation where there's risk exposure, two things are going to happen. It's either you're going to choose to retain the risk, or you're saying, if there is going to be a flood, we are prepared to ensure that we are going to be able to mitigate the cost of the effect of that particular flood by using our own reserves and funds as well. Or we're going to transfer the risk, where we're basically saying that this is where you're going to say we're going to go, for example, the commercial insurance route, where we're basically saying that in case of a loss situation, we're going to now say the insurer is the one that's going to be having those losses on their own book as well, right? Where we now pay premiums, right? Then we also have hybrid systems where there's an element of risk retention and then there's an element of what? Risk transfer. Which means what I'm saying is, even in situations where there's catastrophic risks, you need to ensure that you're able to account for all possible situations where the organization has what? Risk exposures. And you will see that in Unit 1.5, that's one of the issues that was highlighted in Unit 1.5, where we say risk management, one of the risk management failures is failure to identify those risks that the organization is in exposure to. Because remember, your job as a risk manager is to ensure that you identify those risks, quantify those risks, and then present the different risk exposures to the board and top management. Then the board and the top management, based on the risk appetite of the organization, are the ones who are now going to say, remember, there's always a relationship between risk and return. So based on our risk appetite, how much of this risk are we going to be retaining and how much of this risk are we going to be transferring? But we'll look at that in more detail when we look at Unit 11, because Unit 11 basically looks at risk retention. So Unit 11 looks at risk retention, and before as an organization decide to say, we're going to retain the risk, you have to actually find a way of quantifying your risk exposure. So say, if there's going to be a flood that's going to, and all our warehouse is going to be damaged, how are we going to be able to, are we having the capacity to actually what? Make sure that we're able to continue as a going concern if we decide to retain that risk in the case of catastrophic losses, like for example, where there's a flood, or where we saw previously where there was looting as well that happened, and even when you look at the issue of the pandemic as well. Then you also go on to say, if we're going to be transferring, what vehicle are we going to be using to transfer this risk? And when you look at risk transfer as well, you also see that in Study Unit 20, we're going to look at it in detail, where we're saying, yes, in case of a catastrophic loss, we can go on to say we can mitigate the risk by transferring, by going the commercial insurance route. But remember, when you go the commercial insurance route, maybe say, for example, you have your own building, you can insure your building to say if there's a flood or there's looting that happens, and any insurance event, loss event happens, if we lose everything, our building is going to be fully or comprehensively insured. But now, you also have to go further and say, but how are we going to ensure that we're able to continue as a going concern? Because remember, there are those fixed costs that we still have to meet, even during that time where we are going to be laying a claim and then recovering the building as well. So which means that's why you now go on to Unit 20, we're going to be looking at business interruption insurance as well. So which means the whole idea is, even when a situation is volatile, from a risk management perspective, you should have made those decisions prior to you facing those volatile situations. So say, if we are able to identify your risk exposures, it means you should have made that decision to say, are we retaining the risk or are we transferring the risk?
Thank you, Reno. That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Looking forward to the future
So the
units.
Unit 1.5, a risk management failure, one of the risk management failures is failure to identify and quantify those risk exposures. So you must be able to identify those risk exposures that you're going to be facing, whether it's just going to be having a minimal effect or a catastrophic effect. You must be able to identify them and quantify them. And when you quantify them, the decision to retain or transfer is now going to be made by the board of directors and also the top management as well. But before they make that decision, it's your job as risk manager to identify these risk exposures. Then they make the decision to say, if we have a high risk appetite, they will choose to retain more risk. If they have a low risk appetite, they will choose to transfer risk. So we're going to look at that in more detail when you look at Study Unit 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So we're going to do Study Unit 11, you're looking at the risk retention and assessing your capacity. Study unit 12, you're now going to be looking at alternative risk transfer. We're saying you're not going fully the commercial insurance route. So you're having elements of risk retention, risk transfer. So 12, 13, 14. Those are the alternative risk transfer vehicles that are going to be assessing as well. And 15, we're now considering and say, we got the commercial insurance route, what should we do? But as a risk manager, you must be able to identify and quantify those risk exposures. Any other questions?
Thank you, Reno.
All right. Are there any other questions?
Mr. Reno, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding, as you have indicated on the board that there are two approaches to managing risk exposures. So what we have done so far, I think, excluding transfers, is risk retention. What I mean by that is our diversifying of risk and our identifying the whole processes of modeling and everything. Do they fall under risk retention?
So risk, so when you look at risk, when you look at modeling, right, this is basically where are you looking at it from a perspective where you're now saying we're coming up with a system for us to be able to manage this particular risk? Are you looking at it from that particular perspective where you are basically saying, or you're looking at it from a perspective where you're saying we are trying to forecast our risk, our potential risk exposures. So which basically means you're using the different models for you to be able to now identify to say, if this situation plays out, this is how much the risk exposure is going to be based on a particular model. From which perspective are you looking at it from?
Oh, I think I was a bit confused. So before taking the decision to retain or transfer, we have to go through all of those modeling and scenarios. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't worry about it for now, because the risk retention decision, we're going to look at it in study unit 11. That's where we're going to be looking at it. So you don't just go on and say, we are going to, remember that they don't just go on and say, so let's retain the risk. There is a lot of things that you have to take into account before you come up with that you say, we're going to be retaining this. Because remember, one of the things that you have to look at, which is very, very important, is the capacity to retain the risk. Because remember, there are different vehicles that you can also look at when you're looking at what risk retention. Is it going to be funded, or you're putting money aside for the risk for the loss events, or is it going to be unfunded? We're basically saying that in case anything happens, we just absorb it as part of what operating expenses. So there's a lot of things that you have to take into account as well. But please don't worry about it for now. The first thing that we're looking at initially inside unit 1, before we even go on to make those decisions, is basically being able to understand these different risk exposures that you are facing as an organization. Before you go on to look at whether you're now going to be saying you're retaining or doing risk transfer. So you see that from study unit 1 all the way to study unit 9, what we're going to be looking at there is basically understanding your risk exposures. Before you now go on to say, because you start unit 1 to 9, you are basically understanding your different risk exposures. Study unit 10, it's a very short study unit, mainly because the lecturer is now trying to give you an umbrella to say, overarching everything, that this is basically what you look at overall in risk management perspective. Then study unit 11 now, you're now going to now look at understanding these different levels of risk retention or risk transfer. And remember, I said you can either choose to retain the risk or you can choose to transfer the risk. But there's also other hybrid methods as well, where there's an element of risk retention or risk transfer. So take note that there's also other hybrid methods where there's an element of risk retention and also an element of what risk transfer. So please make sure that you take that into account when you look at understanding risk management as well. So from slide 1 to 9, our main aim is just understanding the different risk exposures that for the organization as well, and trying to quantify those risk exposures.
Understood, Manager.
All right. Are there any other questions? So we can continue. So now, remember, we've looked at the situation of complexity. We now move on to the situation of uncertainty. So we now look at the situation of uncertainty. And here they say, uncertainty is a term used to describe a situation characterized by a lack of knowledge, not as to cause and effect, but rather pertaining to whether a certain event is significant enough to constitute meaningful cause. Uncertainty is not volatility. A volatile situation is one in which change is likely, but that change may come quickly or at varying magnitudes. So when you're faced the situation, remember we said when a situation is volatile, we're basically saying that change, there is something is going to happen. You know something is going to happen. But what you don't know is how soon is it going to happen? And you don't know what magnitude is going to be the effect of this risk exposure. But now they say, an uncertain situation, on the other hand, is not so volatile. In fact, there may be no inherent, there may be no change inherent at all. So when you're faced with the situation of uncertainty, we're basically saying you don't know whether something is going to happen or something is not going to happen at all. So that's when you're faced with the situation of uncertainty. Then they also go on to say, because uncertainty exists in the lack of adequate information, addressing it simply involves obtaining information. Investment here entails methods of collecting, interpreting, and sharing information. Uncertainty can be solved structurally by devoting more resources to boundary spanning activities, moving beyond existing networks, data sources, and analysis processes to gather information from new partners and to look at it differently. Information networks are created from many different sources, both inside and outside the firm. The principle is well illustrated by the aftermath of the 2001 US terror attacks, where you look at 9/11. So here they say, to gain reinforced distinction between the different components of VUCA, we note that this post-9/11 situation was not necessarily volatile. The core issue facing the world's governments was not lack of stability or predictability. Rather, government leaders realized that the success of the attacks on the World Trade Center might encourage other terrorists to create similar plots. Which means when you're looking at a situation of uncertainty, we're basically saying, after you look at what happened with the US terror attacks, you don't know whether there is going to be another attack or there's not going to be another. Remember we say the difference between a situation that is volatile and a situation of uncertainty is that with the situation of uncertainty, you don't know whether something is going to happen or not happen. But when a situation is volatile, you know something is going to happen, but you don't know how quickly it's going to happen, and you don't know exactly to what extent are you going to be affected by that particular situation when it plays out. But with the situation of uncertainty, you don't really know exactly whether something is going to happen or is not going to happen. Which means The key thing here with dealing with the situation of uncertainty is basically data gathering. You need to get as much information as possible. And even if you look at the example that they're talking about, when you look at the post 9/11, when you look at what happened after 9/11, you'll see that most of the Western governments, they've basically joined together where they basically share information as well on possible terror threats. If you look at, especially when you look at countries like the US, Canada, and the UK as well, right? You'll see that they basically increased their data sharing from their different sources, and they've also increased information that they're basically gathering from different sources as well from around the world. So that's one way that they've tried as much as possible to deal with the situation of uncertainty, because the problem with the situation of uncertainty is that you don't know whether something is going to happen or not going to happen at all. So information gathering is the key to dealing with a situation of uncertainty. Any question?
Can I ask a question? So just so I understand what you're saying when you speak about uncertainty, right? Is it a matter of looking at an incident that happened, and then are you then saying, should it happen in the future, what are we then going to do? Or is it a matter of just saying something has never happened, but should it happen, then what's the next step? Should that incident happen, or should that pandemic come to life?
We are going to look at it in more detail in third unit 2. We were basically saying, when it comes to risk management, historically, risk management was basically a separate department operating separately from the other departments. But remember, now they have managed to make sure that they integrate the risk management department with other organizations. Reason being, we are saying, even if you don't know whether something is going to happen or is not going to happen, it's not enough to say, what are we going to do to mitigate the effect, or to ensure that it doesn't happen from a risk management perspective? Or if it does happen, make sure that there is going to be less impact on the organization as well. It's not enough. You need to go on further from a risk management perspective and say, so if it does happen, over and above mitigating the effect and the impact of this loss event, if everyone else is going to be affected as well, or even as we are going to be affected, how do we create an opportunity so that we create a competitive advantage for the organization as well? So organizations so that's why we said organizations need to be agile now, so that we're able to now run different scenarios. So we're going to look at it in detail when we also look at scenario analysis, which is also going to be looking at inside in. So remember, study unit 1, we are being introduced to a lot of things. And study unit 2, we are now going to go on further and understanding exactly, so how do we ensure as an organization from a risk management perspective to ensure that we are going to go over and beyond just mitigating the effects of this uncertain situation playing out, where if the loss event just happened, how do we mitigate it? But we need to also go on further and say, how are we going to be able to create a competitive advantage faced by the situation which is basically uncertain in this case. So you have to go further and beyond by ensuring that you are able to see and identify those opportunities that are presenting themselves if the loss event does happen, and then how do we create a competitive advantage? Because if we're able to create a competitive advantage, we are also going to make sure that we're able to meet and achieve the goal of the firm, which is to maximize shareholders' wealth. Are we together?
Yes, thank you.
So which means, yes, you need to gather information based on the information that you have. This is where we talked about, remember, someone was asking about modeling. This is where you now, when you gather information, this is where you now look at modeling by looking at what scenario analysis. And we're going to go on further. I think in study with you, we also look at in more detail when it comes to scenario analysis as well. We were going to say, after this specific situation plays out as well, what are we going to do if this happens? Or how are we going to do if the situation plays out like this? And what are we going to do when this situation plays out like this? And with the main goal, making sure that over and above mitigating the impact of the loss event, how are we going to ensure that we're able to create a competitive advantage? A good example of companies that were able to create a competitive advantage, especially when you look at these loss events, is where we saw that, for example, you look at airlines. There are some airlines, remember the planes were grounded, no passengers moving, nothing happening. But those airlines that who had already anticipated and prepared themselves for these potential situations to play out as well. Because remember, the pandemic is, yes, it affected everyone. The pandemic ended up being a pandemic, but remember, it also affected other countries previously, especially when you look at the Asian countries, like, for example, you look at China, you look at, I think it's Pakistan and I think India as well. They were affected by this, but it's an endemic, from an endemic perspective, where it didn't grow that big as well. So which means these airlines now, once this situation played out, that's when you see that these airlines, instead of moving passengers, they now removed all the seats and then they started moving what? Cargo. So what do you see? Is they are moving cargo, instead of their airlines just being packed, they were now moving cargo, which basically means that they are now creating a competitive advantage in the face of a loss event where we're faced with what? With the pandemic. So that's basically what we're saying, that an effective risk manager should be able to be able to actually be able to achieve this. But for you to be able to achieve this, basically means that you need to play out with all these situations and prepare yourself with all these situations. Eventually, if they do play out from a risk management perspective, how are we going to ensure as an organization that we're able to continue maximizing shareholders' wealth? And you're going to create a competitive advantage because your competitors, they're going to be parking their planes while your planes are also continuing moving as well. Are there any questions? Moving on to the next scenario. The next situation that we're going to be looking at is a situation where there is complexity. And yet they say a complex situation is characterized by many interconnected parts. Again, this is distinct from a volatile or uncertain situation. And on the next paragraph, they go on to say, instead, the most straightforward way for an organization to address complexity is to simplify the situation by adopting a structure that mirrors that of the environment. So research has consistently shown organizations that adapt themselves to match environmental change perform at substantively higher levels, whereas firms that maintain past structures and processes in the face of a changing business environment are less effective. So in the most obvious example, as a small informal organization grows, it is expected that formal departments will appear to address what has become too much for a single person to handle. Then, finance, operations, marketing, and human resources functions are established so that each part of the organization addresses something in which it has expertise. So when you look at a situation of complexity, as an example that they give in this case, they're basically saying, as an organization grows, normally at the inception, the founders of the organization, they are basically running from a garage where they are doing everything. They are creating a product, they are marketing the product, they are doing the accounting of the money that is paid by the customers on the product. They are basically doing the manufacturing of the product if they can as well. So what we find is the demand for that particular product grows as well. There's a lot of complexity that is going to be growing within an organization where a few individuals are not going to be able to manage. Because remember, an individual now have to be facing a situation where there are customers who've got queries, there are customers who want to place an order, they also need to make time to manufacture as well. So which basically means that to deal with a situation where there's complexity within an organization because of the growth of the organization, then it basically means that one way of dealing with complexity when the organization is growing is now where you are now having specific departments dealing with specific activities as well. And that's one way in which an organization can be able to deal with what? Situation of complexity. So they go on further to say, in Reed's situation where they give us a case study, his firm's growth into so many new markets creates a complexity that might best be resolved by moving to a more geographically based organization structure, such that different branches of the company are able to specialize in understanding and exploiting market regulations and idiosyncrasies as well, which basically means that if you're not going to be having demand, for example, the company, you start your company in South Africa, but then you realize that there's demand in Botswana, there's demand in Nigeria, there's demand in, for example, in Iran, there's demand in different countries as well. What are you going to do? For example, when you look at the case study of MTN, they now having what? Subsidiaries now in different what? In different countries. So they create different subsidiaries in different countries, and those subsidiaries now are the ones that are going to be able to maneuver themselves so that they're able to better understand the environment in which they're operating, reporting to the parent company, but at the same time, they are basically going to be able to have what? Different subsidiaries, which are basically better able to actually make decisions in the environment in which they're going to be operating as well. So that's basically one way of dealing with complexity. Are we on the same page? Any questions? Or any questions from a real-life example? Any questions? Moving on to the last acronym, which is ambiguity. They say ambiguity characterizes situations where there is doubt about the nature of cause and effect relationships. So just a lack of understanding as to what will happen next. So, and that lack of understanding is distinct from uncertainty. In a merely uncertain situation, you have a good idea of what causes what. So, in a situation of uncertainty, what you're worried about is whether something is going to happen or is not going to happen. But what causes that situation to play out, you have a good idea of exactly what is going to cause that loss event to actually happen if it happens. Now they say, an ambiguous situation, on the other hand, typically revolves around a wholly new product, market, innovation, or opportunity. So an ambiguous situation is more challenging because of the newness. So there is little historical precedent for determining the outcomes of certain causes or course of action. So in the case of ambiguity, we believe the key to success is experimentation, not slack resources, information gathering, and restructuration. So when you're faced with a situation of ambiguity, in most cases, you face a situation of ambiguity where, for example, you are breaking into a new market. Like, for example, you have your organization that is operating, that you started in South Africa, but then you now want to, you are basically, you've created your own unique product that no one else is offering as well. And now you don't know how the other markets are going to receive that particular product as well. So that's basically where you face with what? A situation of what? Of ambiguity. So you don't know exactly whether it's going to be received well or it's not going to be received well. So that's basically the risk that you're going to be facing. So are we on the same page when it comes to a situation of ambiguity? Any questions? Any questions?
I have a question, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So, the difference between uncertainty and ambiguity thereof is that uncertainty has prior and have to experience all of those new phases and create that new information.
Okay, so what they're saying, the difference there between uncertainty and ambiguity, right? With uncertainty, you know the nature of the problem that you're facing. So you know the nature of the problem that you're facing, but what you don't know is whether that loss event is going to happen or is not going to happen. So that's the main issue that you're going to be worrying yourself with. So you know the nature of the problem, but what you don't know exactly is whether that situation is going to happen or that loss event is not going to happen. So that's why you're faced with the situation of what? Uncertainty. But if it's ambiguous, you don't know over and above worrying about whether something's going to happen or not happen. So the other thing that you're worried about is that if it plays out as well, you don't know whether to what extent it's going to affect you. You don't know. And you don't know exactly how it's going to end up affecting. So which basically means that you don't know how it's going to end up affecting, and you don't know exactly to what extent it's going to end up affecting you as well. So that's basically where you are faced with the situation of what? Ambiguity. So you don't know the cause and effect, which means that in preparing yourself to say, so what are we going to do if this happens? You don't know if what you're saying is the remedy to the situation is actually going to work. That's where you're faced with the situation of what? Ambiguity. That's why they say, if you look at the key thing that they say there, is that with ambiguity, they say an ambiguous situation is more challenging because of the newness. There is little or historical precedent or for determining the outcomes of certain causes or course of action. So you don't know if we take this decision to remedy this situation this way. If we take this decision to remedy this situation this way, you don't know whether your recommendations are going to result in what? In the situation being resolved. So here they say, in the case of ambiguity, we believe the key to success is experimentation, not slack resources, information gathering, or restructuring. So which means, in this case, when you look at experimentation, this is where you look at a lot of research and development. A typical industry that is faced with a lot of ambiguity is where you look at the IT industry. Because remember, with IT, every now and again, they are breaking ground and introducing to us new products. So in IT, they're always breaking ground and introducing to us new products. Now, as they introduce new products, they don't know whether the market is going to like this product or the market is just going to see and not even like this product as well. So you see this quite a lot when you look at, for example, when you look at where they introduced cell phones. Remember, historically, there was landlines. So as they introduced new cell phones, it was basically a totally new product altogether. And those who were introducing the new cell phones, they were not sure exactly whether the people are going to be receptive to the cell phones or they're not going to be receptive to the cell phones, which basically means that there's basically a lot of ambiguity that they're basically going to be facing as well. So that's why you see that a lot of IT companies, they spend the profits that they make, they make sure that a huge chunk of the profit that they make is actually retained for, and the reason why they retain a lot of those profits is mainly because they spend that money on what? Research and development. So to deal with ambiguity in the products that they offer, they have to make sure that they spend a lot of money on research and development so that they're able to now check to see exactly, so how are we going to be able to ensure that this product that we are introducing to the market, the people are going to be receptive, and what are we going to do to ensure that we're able to make sure that the people are going to be receptive. So they have to spend more money on research and development. Are we on the same page when it comes to the difference between uncertainty and ambiguity?
I just want to make sure that I have captured you well.
Mm-hmm.
You are saying in terms of uncertainty, it's because it's when you know what will be the event, but you don't know whether it's going to happen or not.
Mm-hmm.
Then you are saying on ambiguity, it's based on the root cause and effect. Actually, you don't know what can cause the event and how much damage it can cause. So because of that, your advisors will not be able to give you controls and recommendations to address that, because actually they don't know what can cause it and what will be the effect of it.
Yes. Now, to try to, because you don't know the cause and effect, that's why they say the key thing to ensure that you are able to be successful is through experimentation. And people, when they talk about experimentation, this is where you're spending a lot of your time when it comes to research and development. A good typical example where where organizations or in interest that is constantly faced with situations of ambiguity is what where I gave you an example where you look at what in the IT industry. Because if you're introducing a new product, it's a totally new product to people. You don't know exactly how it's going to end up affecting the organization if you introduce this particular product, whether the people are going to be receptive to the product or are not going to be receptive to the product as well. Look at this. If you look at the VR headsets, remember there are so many other companies that have introduced these VR headsets, and you see that recently Meta did introduce the VR headsets, and I don't think people have been that receptive on those headsets. But then Apple also introduced the Apple Vision Pro, and we don't know exactly how people, they're still testing out to see exactly, they've already introduced the product, and they're still, right now, they're still assessing whether it's going to be a success or it's not going to be a success as well. So you see that when you're faced with the situation of ambiguity, the key word there is new. You are basically facing a new situation. You have a new product. And with that, for example, if you have a new product, you don't know how it's going to end up playing out. Are people going to be receptive on the new product? Because if they are not receptive, what is going to happen? It basically means that there's losses that are going to be incurring as well. So are we on the same page when it comes to a situation of ambiguity and a situation of uncertainty? So remember, with the situation of uncertainty,
for me, it's a yes.
Yes. So with the situation of uncertainty, the cause and effect, you know exactly these particular products that we already have in the market. or this particular information or problem that you have in the market as well, you already know exactly the cause and the effect. To say, if this happens, this is what we're going to be this basically what we're going to be faced with as well. But when it comes to situation of ambiguity, you don't know the cause and effect. So you don't know if we make this decision, you don't know exactly how it's going to end up affecting as well. So which means that's why they say experimentation is key to dealing with the situation of ambiguity, because with experimentation, you start to have an idea to say, if it's the more we experiment, you start now having an idea to say, probably this is going to be affecting this element, and maybe this one is going to be affecting this particular element as well, which means that you start having an idea of to say, maybe this is going to end up affecting this one, and this is going to end up affecting this one, and these are going to be able to achieve success. And the experimentation is basically research and development, where you're basically spending a lot of your money on what R&D, where especially when you look at IT companies, they spend years and years and years on what? On experimentation as well. The same goes with pharmaceuticals. As they introduce new drugs, they don't know whether this drug is going to be a success or is not going to be a success. And we saw that quite a lot when it comes to the pandemic, where when we hit with the pandemic across the world, they were in a hurry to introduce the new drugs as well. And they didn't know whether these drugs were going to result in a success in alleviating COVID or not as well. So the cause and effect, you don't know. So the best thing that they can do is basically keep on experimenting until they find something that they say, this might be able to give us a success as well. And even when you look at the success that they also give you as well, they don't give you a success to say, we know 100% we're going to be able to result in a particular success as well. They give you in percentage terms, mainly because the more they experiment, the more confident they are that we are more likely to result in what? In a success. It's confidence, but that's why they don't even give you what? A 200% confidence to say, we are 100% that this is going to give you. That's why you see that all these vaccines that were introduced, because it was totally new situation that they were basically facing as well, you saw that they were giving you percentage success to say, this one is a 60% success rate, this one is a 90% success rate, this one is a 75% success rate. It's all because of experimentation. So which means we are facing the situation of ambiguity. The best way that you can deal with the situation of ambiguity is to experiment, because the more you experiment, the more you understand the cause and effect, and the more you understand the cause and effect, the more confident you are that you're going to be able to achieve success. Are we on the same page?
Just to double check one item there, if we are on the experimentation, will it be correct to say let the organization go through the situation so that when it comes out on the other side, it's much better prepared, it's much better having information. So with other words, if you were talking about the drugs that you are talking about, not even the drugs, we are entering the winter now. There will be influenza and all that. So we get injected by the real flu in order to prevent the actual flu getting into our body. So with other words, on experimentation, one of the other things, not the only one of the other things is to let the organization go to the fire so that when it comes out on the other side, it will understand how bad is the fire and how to prevent it in the future. Will that analysis be correct?
Partly. What I'm more concerned with, where my concern is that the moment you say let the organization go to the fire, it has to go to the fire in a controlled environment, where we are basically saying that instead of saying we are just going to take the whole product and sell it to the market, why don't we have control groups where we're saying that, well, remember, like for example, when it comes to drugs, they don't just take when they say maybe this one can be a success, they just take the drug and they give it to everyone in the market. They have control groups where For example, they have those vaccine trials where they say we have a control group of, let's say, a few people to 1,000 people to 10,000 people as well. So they also do those experimentation in a control group, but not exposing. Because remember, if they just take that drug and they give it to everyone in the market, what is the risk there? If the drug has side effects which are heavy, if the drug does not work, and they've sold this drug that does not work to people in the market, they are running the risk of what? Being sued. So which means that with when you're faced with the situation of ambiguity, the key thing is experimentation. And with experimentation, it basically means that, yes, you are eventually, when you're more confident with the particular product as well, you are going to be giving it to a control group. Typical example, drug companies. Remember, they don't just give it to everyone. They give it to a control group where from those vaccine trials, that's when they can now be able to now come up with percentages. Say, now we are more confident to say maybe 8%. You are confident that 80%, there's an 80% chance that that is going to be successful. So that's where my concern would be. It's not like I'm going to be taking that product and just throw it in the market. It has to be go through experiments where there's still going to be somewhat control before you take it 100% to the market. Are we together? All right. Is there another question? All right. Is there another question? So on section 3, they look at the final thoughts, and here they say, globalization has created opportunities with one hand as it has induced threats with the other. The stubborn global recession has planted repeated bursts of optimism for the return to path of prosperity. So layer on the challenge of digesting technological advancements that impacts industry as well as the consequences of demographic shifts in the workforce, and there can be little doubt that leaders have their hands full. So that's basically the final thoughts coming from this particular article. Please take note as well, we're going to look at it in study unit 2. When it comes to a situation of uncertainty, remember we said, when you're faced with a situation of uncertainty, you don't know whether something is going to happen or not happen as well. So when you look at situation of uncertainty as well, there is a lot of uncertainty that we face in the world. Because remember, there can be a flood, there can be a volcano that will erupt, or there can be a lot of, for example, if it's weather issues, there can be a lot of things that you are going to be looking at as well. So remember we said, as a risk manager, you need to be able to identify the risk exposures as well, right? So it basically means that we'll look at it in more detail, where we now distinguish between a situation of uncertainty and a situation that we deem to be risk. So uncertainty is basically infinite in nature, because there's a lot of things that are likely to happen that affects your organization. We're basically saying that we might be affected because maybe there's an asteroid that can hit our building, or there can be a flood, or there can be a cyclone, or there can be a hurricane, or there can be so many other things that can also, if you look at it from the weather condition perspective, that can affect our organization. So you will see that from a situation of uncertainty, remember we say that as a risk manager, you need to identify and you need to quantify the risk so that the board can now be able to actually make decisions to say, based on our risk exposures, this is the risk that we're prepared to take, and this is the risk that we need to transfer to, for example, through insurance as well. So you'll see that a situation of risk is actually a subset of a situation of what? Uncertainty. Because a situation of uncertainty, you're basically looking at a wide range of possible things that can affect the organization. But then, when it comes to a situation of risk, this is a situation where we're basically saying that from this wide range of things or conditions or risk exposures that can of this wide range of situations that can affect our organization, we now need to plug and choose those exposures that we deem to be a risk, which is basically the ones that we're saying from a quantification of our exposure perspective. These are the situations that we need to be able to identify and quantify so that we're able to actually measure our exposure as well. So take note, we're going to look at it in more detail in study unit 2, where we're basically saying that a situation of uncertainty and a situation of risk. A situation of risk is basically a subset of the situation of what? Uncertainty. In the sense that with the situation of risk, from this wide universe of conditions that can play out negatively and affect our organization, we are now plugging in those which we deem to be relevant and likely to affect us as well in our organization. And those are situations that we deem to be risk. So what does that mean? With the situation of uncertainty, we are not able to ascertain probabilities to an uncertain situation. So if we're faced with uncertainties, we are not able to ascertain probabilities. But when it comes to a situation of risk, because we've plugged out these situations which we deem to be relevant for us, we can now be able to ascertain probabilities to these situations that we deem to be a situation of risk, because we determined and plugged out those situations which we deem to be relevant to us, which can also negatively affect our organization. So I'm just highlighting this so that when you look at the study units going forward as well, you shouldn't be confused when they now talk about a situation of risk and a situation of what? Certainty.
Can the two be used interchangeably?
Usually, people use these two things interchangeably, but from a risk management perspective, they are two different things. This one is more precise, and this one is broad, basically. The difference is that this one is broad because it covers an infinite universe of things that can affect us. And this one is more precise because from this infinite universe, we are now plucking out those situations which we deem to be relevant to our organization and affecting our organization. All right. Can we take a few minutes break until 9:45? Can we take a few minutes break until 9:45? Then at 9:45, we'll look at section 2.1. So can we take a few minutes break until 9:45? Then we'll look at unit 2.1.